White bully torments black girl, but she didn't know her mom was FBI. Sometimes the loudest cruelty meets the quietest strength, and that's when fear changes sides. The hallway was alive with noise, the kind of midday chaos that belonged to every American high school. Lockers slammed in rhythmic percussion, sneakers squeaked across the wax tile floor, and the overlapping hum of gossip rose above it all. But when the sharp clang of a locker rattled like thunder, everything froze for just a second. Heads turned, footsteps slowed, and then just as quickly most eyes darted back down. Pressed against that cold locker was Aaliyah Monroe. 17, black, tall for her age but slight in build, she wore a fitted sundress patterned with soft yellows, her braids tied neatly with a ribbon her mother had knotted that very morning. Now her cheek was flattened against dented metal, the icy ridges digging into her skin. Her books had spilled from her arms, papers scattered like leaves underfoot, trampled by passing sneakers that refused to stop. The one holding her there was Emily Harris. Blonde hair pulled into a cheerleader's ponytail, nails painted a glossy white, and a smirk that carried the privilege of someone who had never been told no. Her palm pressed firmly against the back of Aaliyah's head, pinning her like a trophy. Her voice cut through the hallway like glass dragged across steel. "See this? This is exactly where you belong." Laughter erupted from the pack of girls behind her, their matching pastel sweaters and designer sneakers marking them like a uniform. They weren't laughing because it was funny, they were laughing because Emily demanded it. Aaliyah's chest tightened but she didn't flinch. She kept both palms pressed flat against the locker, not in surrender but in control. Every muscle in her back was coiled with quiet strength. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not give Emily the satisfaction of brokenness. Around them, students shuffled faster. Some glanced quickly, guilt in their eyes, then looked away. Others kept their heads down, clutching textbooks as though silence would shield them from complicity. A boy at the far end of the hallway hesitated, biting his lip as though he might intervene, but his friend tugged him away. The hallway air grew suffocating. Emily leaned closer, her perfume sharp and sweet, her words cutting deeper than the shove itself. "Don't think for a second you're equal just because they let you in here. This school isn't yours. People like you should remember their place." The phrase carried weight, dripping with a history older than both of them. And still Aaliyah didn't move. Her silence filled the cracks between Emily's words, thickening the air until even Emily's laughter felt too loud. From the corner, a few girls shifted uncomfortably. One chewed on her nail, another hugged her books tighter, but none spoke. None moved. Silence was safer. Finally, Emily yanked her hand away, stepping back with a grin that faltered just for a moment, because Aaliyah turned her head. Slowly, deliberately, Aaliyah pushed herself off the locker. She smoothed the front of her dress, dusted her palms and then lifted her eyes. She didn't glare. She didn't speak. She just looked directly at Emily. Her eyes were calm, steady, unshaken. And that calmness unsettled Emily more than any outburst would have. She had expected rage or humiliation or tears. Instead, she was met with nothing, a silence so loud it made her skin prickle. "What? Cat got your tongue?" Emily sneered, her voice pitched higher, straining for control. She glanced at her friends who snickered on cue, but their laughter was thinner now. Aaliyah didn't answer. The bell rang but no one moved for class. The hallway stretched with tension, every second longer than the last. For just a flicker, Emily's smirk cracked, but she forced it back, flipping her ponytail as though the moment hadn't shifted. Still, the seed of fear had been planted. Lunchtime came and the cafeteria buzzed with noise, until it didn't. Emily strutted through the aisles like she owned the room, her entourage trailing behind her, laughter echoing as if the tables and trays belonged to them. Her eyes locked on Aaliyah, who sat alone at the far end of the room. A single tray in front of her, a book open beside it, untouched apple glinting under fluorescent lights. Emily slammed her tray onto Aaliyah's table, loud enough that conversation stilled. "Still eating alone? Guess nobody wants to sit with you. Guess that's what happens when you're different." The word hung heavy in the air. Students shifted uneasily. Some whispered, others stared openly. Trays clattered as forks paused mid-air. Aaliyah placed her fork down gently, lifted her gaze and met Emily's eyes. No flinch. No blink. Just silence. The silence cut sharper than any insult. It pressed into Emily's chest, made her throat tighten, made her smirk falter. Her friends glanced at each other, waiting for the explosion that never came. "You think you're better than me?" Emily snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of Aaliyah's unyielding calm. She shoved Aaliyah's tray with sudden fury, food crashing to the floor in a wet splatter. Gasps spread across the cafeteria like a ripple. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't speak. She simply looked at Emily, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than the chaos. And that broke Emily more than any punch could have. That evening, whispers filled the school like wildfire. "Did you hear?" one student murmured near the lockers. "She's not just some new girl." Another swore they saw black SUVs outside the school gates. Rumors bled into myth. Emily laughed it off at first, brushing aside the whispers. But when she returned the next morning, her stomach dropped. Two figures stood by the front entrance, dressed in dark jackets, their stance sharp, their gaze locked like steel. They didn't touch her. They didn't threaten. They simply waited. When Emily tried to walk past, one of them spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. "Mrs. Monroe would like a word." Her blood ran cold. Everyone knew that name. Special Agent Monroe. FBI. Emily turned slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. At the far end of the hallway, Aaliyah leaned against a locker, calm as ever, eyes steady. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Emily's knees nearly buckled. For the first time, she wasn't predator. She was prey. And for the first time, the school saw clearly where true power lay. The morning after the men in black jackets had appeared at the gates, Lincoln High was not the same. Whispers filled the hallways like a draft through broken windows. Students who once laughed at Aaliyah now moved aside when she walked past. Conversations hushed mid-sentence as she entered a room. Even the teachers, normally so loud about rules and order, carried a stiffness in their voices when they said her name. But beneath the surface, fear and resentment coiled tight. Emily sat stiff-backed in homeroom, her manicured fingers drumming against her desk, her ponytail less polished than usual. Her friends huddled close, whispering fast, but every so often their eyes flicked to the door, expecting shadows to walk in. Emily forced herself to laugh at their nervous jokes, but the sound came out thin, brittle. When Aaliyah entered, head high and movements unhurried, the room shifted. No one mocked her. No one dared. But the silence that greeted her was jagged, not soft. It carried envy, suspicion, and fear wrapped into one. By third period, the institution made its move. The loudspeaker crackled, summoning Aaliyah to the principal's office. The hallway seemed to grow longer with every step she took toward the heavy wooden door. Inside, Principal Green sat at his desk, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile tight and rehearsed. Beside him, Emily Harris perched primly in her chair, flanked by her mother, Mrs. Harris, head of the local school board. The air was thick with perfume and power. "Miss Monroe," Principal Green began, folding his hands carefully, "we're here to resolve yesterday's incident." Emily's lips curved into something smug, but her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously toward the door as if Naomi Monroe herself might walk in at any second. Green's voice was low, almost pleading. "Now, in order to move forward peacefully, I think it would be best if you—" He hesitated, then cleared his throat, apologized. "Not because you were at fault but because leadership requires grace. Sometimes setting aside pride is how we keep harmony." The words hung heavy. An apology. Again. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the notebook in her lap. Her silence filled the office, pressing in on every corner. Mrs. Harris leaned forward, her pearls catching the light. "It would mean a lot, dear," she said sweetly, her voice coated in sugar but edged in steel. "Think of the example you'd be setting for others." Emily smirked, her confidence slowly returning under the weight of her mother's influence. But before Aaliyah could respond, the door swung open. Naomi Monroe stepped inside. Her dark blazer was sharp against the sterile beige of the office, her badge glinting at her hip. Her eyes swept the room once, cold and commanding, before landing on her daughter. "She won't be apologizing," Naomi said flatly. Principal Green's composure cracked. He stammered something about policy and restoring order, but Naomi raised a hand, silencing him. "What you're asking," she said, voice low and deliberate, "is that my daughter carry the burden of her own harassment. You are demanding that she erase what was done to her so this school can pretend it doesn't have a problem." Her eyes flicked to Emily, then to Mrs. Harris. "That isn't resolution. That is complicity." The office grew still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Mrs. Harris straightened in her chair, her face hardening. "With all due respect, Agent Monroe, this is a school matter. Perhaps it's best handled internally." Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile, though there was no warmth in it. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harris, I don't let systems bury the truth to protect the privileged. If this school won't protect my daughter, then the FBI will. And if you're worried about publicity, don't." Because if I have to make this public, I will. Emily's smirk vanished. Principal Green swallowed hard. His hands fidgeted on the desk. He muttered something about needing to review procedures, his voice stripped of authority. Naomi placed a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. We're leaving. As they walked out, Aaliyah glanced back once. Emily sat frozen, her mask of superiority cracking under the weight of exposure. But Aaliyah knew it wasn't over. That afternoon, her locker was vandalized. Red markers screamed across the door, "You don't belong here." Her textbooks were soaked in the sink of the girls' bathroom. Her gym shoes gone. It wasn't the bold, public cruelty anymore. It was sabotage, shadows in the hall, whispers behind her back. The system had been rattled, and now it struck back in quieter, dirtier ways. That night, Aaliyah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her ruined books. Naomi poured coffee, her movements calm, steady. "They'll try to silence you," Naomi said softly. "They'll twist the truth. They'll paint you as the problem. That's how this works." Aaliyah lifted her eyes, the quiet strength still there, sharper now. "Then I won't bend." Naomi nodded, pride flickering in her gaze. "Good. Because they're not just afraid of me, Aaliyah. They're afraid of you. You don't realize it yet, but your silence, it unsettles them. It's louder than any words." For the first time, Aaliyah allowed herself a small, steady smile. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Emily wasn't done. And neither was the system that protected her. The next morning, the school hallways hummed with their usual rhythm. Sneakers squeaking against linoleum, lockers slamming shut, chatter rising and falling like static. But beneath the ordinary noise lurked something sharper, something sour. Whispers trailed Aaliyah Monroe like shadows. Heads turned, then quickly ducked away. Conversations hushed the moment she passed, leaving only muffled giggles or sharp glances exchanged behind her back. The incident from yesterday was still alive in everyone's minds, but not in the way truth deserved. Stories had shifted overnight. Somewhere between cafeteria gossip and whispered phone calls, the facts had been bent until they snapped. What the school remembered wasn't Emily's hand pinning Aaliyah against a locker or the humiliation of food splattering across the cafeteria floor. No, what spread through the grapevine was something else entirely. Aaliyah's dangerous. She snapped at Emily. She gets violent when she's mad. She's weird, just stares at people like a psycho. Aaliyah heard it all without hearing a word. The fragments floated down hallways, bounced off lockers, leaked through giggles behind cupped palms. She carried her books closer to her chest, her braids brushing against her shoulder as she kept her chin lifted. Silence, as always, was her shield. But shields, even when strong, couldn't stop the sting. At her locker, two girls leaned against the wall, whispering loud enough to be overheard. "I heard she shoved Emily first," one said, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "No, my cousin swears she threatened her," the other replied, her voice tinged with glee. "That's why those FBI people showed up. Her mom probably had to come clean up her mess." Their laughter spilled into the hallway. They weren't brave enough to say it to her face, but their words cut anyway. Aaliyah pressed her locker shut, the clang echoing louder than usual, then walked past them with steady steps, refusing to break pace. By third period, the whispers had taken root deep enough that even the teachers moved differently around her. Mr. Klein, her history teacher, paused when she raised her hand, his eyes darting toward her before moving quickly to another student. "Let's hear from someone else," he said, pretending it was fairness when everyone knew it wasn't. At lunch, her isolation grew heavier. She sat at the far end of the cafeteria again, her tray neatly in front of her. The chair across from her remained empty, though students filled every other table. Emily sat with her friends near the center, her laugh exaggerated, every movement designed to remind the room where the power still sat. People leaned closer to Emily, nodding at her words, echoing her version of events as if it were gospel. "She looked crazy," Emily was saying, her voice pitched high enough to carry. "Like, seriously unhinged. Who just stares at people like that? Totally creepy. I was honestly scared she'd snap." Gasps and murmurs followed. Emily's friends nodded eagerly, adding flourishes. Aaliyah had glared, she had clenched her fists, she had muttered under her breath. None of it was true, but in the absence of resistance, lies grew roots. Aaliyah kept her eyes on her plate, fork tapping lightly against the plastic tray. Her silence was strength, but now that strength was being turned into a weapon against her. They called it cold. They called it dangerous. They called it proof of something that wasn't there. When her apple rolled off the tray and hit the floor, a boy at the next table leaned down, picked it up, then smirked before setting it back on her tray with exaggerated care. Wouldn't want you to snap at me too, he muttered just loud enough for others to hear. Laughter rippled. Aaliyah's throat tightened, but she didn't respond. She couldn't, not when she knew silence was the only thing keeping her from giving them exactly what they wanted. By the final bell, the weight was unbearable. She walked toward the exit, head high, eyes forward, while the storm swirled around her. Emily's friends walked behind her, whispering words sharp enough to pierce skin. Psycho. Weirdo. FBI brat. Outside, the afternoon sun glared against the pavement. Students spilled into groups, laughter bouncing, plans for the weekend buzzing. Aaliyah stood alone, the distance between her and the others stretching like a canyon. And then Emily appeared again, her ponytail swaying like a flag of victory. She wasn't alone. 2 teachers stood near her, watching carefully but saying nothing. Emily's smirk widened when she saw Aaliyah, her voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. You know what's pathetic? Emily sneered. You hide behind silence like it makes you strong. But really it just makes you a freak. Everyone here knows it. Even the teachers know it. Nobody wants you here. The words cracked like whips. Students nearby froze, waiting for Aaliyah's reaction. The teachers didn't intervene. They didn't defend her. They just stood there, complicit in their stillness. For a moment, Aaliyah felt the weight of it all pressing down. The lies, the stares, the teacher's indifference, the friends she never had the chance to make. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. Strength isn't loud, Aaliyah. Strength is knowing when to let silence speak for you. She met Emily's eyes, calm but unwavering. And just like before, she didn't speak. She didn't break. Her silence was a mirror, and in that mirror, Emily saw herself for what she was. But the others? They didn't see it. They only saw what they wanted to believe. That evening, the school's online forums lit up with threads. Violent new girl. Creepy stares. FBI kid freaks out. None of it was true, but truth was never the currency of gossip. Fear and spectacle were. When Aaliyah came home, her mother, Special Agent Monroe, was waiting at the kitchen table, files stacked neatly beside her. She looked up, her sharp eyes softening when she saw her daughter's face. They're twisting it, aren't they? Her mother asked quietly. Aaliyah nodded once, setting her bag down. Her mother reached across the table, took her hand. Then it's time the truth stops whispering. It's time it starts speaking louder than their lies. For the first time all day, Aaliyah let out a long breath. The storm inside her didn't calm, it shifted, focused. If the school wanted to paint her as a villain, then her mother's training, her mother's discipline, and her mother's badge would show them who truly held power. But power revealed in silence still had a cost. And tomorrow, when the rumors reached their peak, the cost would come due. The following morning, Lincoln High didn't feel like a school. Felt like a stage. The hallways hummed with anticipation, every whispered rumor swelling into the kind of tension that clung to the walls. Students walked faster, eyes darting, voices low. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Aaliyah stepped through the front doors, her braids brushing against her shoulders, her books clutched close to her chest. The whispers followed as always, but this time she didn't shrink under them. She walked with a quiet steadiness that unsettled those who watched. At the end of the hall, Emily Harris waited. Her arms were crossed, her ponytail swinging like a banner of defiance, her smirk sharpened into something colder than usual. Behind her, a cluster of teachers hovered. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting, as though expecting Aaliyah to confirm the story they'd already chosen to believe. Emily stepped forward, her voice loud enough to silence the hallway. See? She doesn't even deny it. Everyone knows you're a freak, Monroe. You think you're better than us because of your mom, but everyone knows the truth now. You're violent. You don't belong here. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised, ready to record. The trap had been set. But before Aaliyah could respond or refuse to, the crowd parted. Special Agent Naomi Monroe walked into the hallway. Her heels struck the linoleum like a gavel. Her presence was impossible to ignore. She carried no weapon, but the weight of her authority was heavier than any firearm. Behind her came 2 suited agents, silent as shadows, their badges glinting in the fluorescent light. The hallway froze. Naomi's eyes swept across the crowd before landing on Emily. She didn't look at the girl the way a teacher or a parent might. She looked at her the way an investigator looks at a suspect. Calm, precise, unflinching. Emily Harris, Naomi said evenly, her voice slicing through the silence. You and I need to have a conversation. Emily's smirk faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. Naomi raised one eyebrow, her tone still measured but edged with steel. Don't you? Because I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing security footage, speaking with witnesses and compiling evidence. And what I've found is a pattern. A pattern of harassment, of targeted bullying, and of faculty negligence that has been allowed to fester. The crowd buzzed with shock. Phones tilted higher. For once, Emily's entourage didn't laugh. Naomi turned to the teachers standing nearby. And as for you, your silence has been deafening. You've chosen to ignore the truth in favor of convenience. That ends today. Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. Another teacher looked at the ground. None dared to speak. Naomi's gaze returned to the crowd. This school has tried to twist my daughter's silence into guilt. But let me remind you, silence is not weakness. It is strength. It is restraint. And in this case, it is evidence of who the true aggressors are. A murmur rippled through the hallway. Students who had parroted Emily's lies now exchanged uneasy glances. The story was cracking in real time. Emily tried to recover, her voice shaking. She's lying. She's dangerous. Ask anyone. Naomi stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Dangerous? Or simply unwilling to break under your cruelty? The difference matters. And I think everyone here just saw which one is true. The silence that followed was suffocating, for Emily. For the first time, the eyes of the school weren't laughing with her. They were watching her, judging her. Naomi's agent stepped forward, handing envelopes to the teachers. These are formal reports. Copies have already been delivered to the district superintendent and the Department of Education. There will be an investigation, not only into Emily Harris's conduct, but into this administration's failure to act. Accountability doesn't end in this hallway. Principal Green's composure cracked. He stammered something about policy and restoring order, but Naomi raised a hand, silencing him. The teachers paled. Students gasped. Emily's friends slowly stepped back, their loyalty evaporating under the weight of federal scrutiny. Aaliyah finally lifted her head, her gaze locking on Emily's. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence, once mocked as weakness, now rang louder than any accusation. Emily's own lies crumbled in its echo. The bell rang, sharp and sudden, but no one moved. For the first time, Emily Harris stood alone. That evening, the school's online forums told a new story. Not of Aaliyah the violent freak, but of Emily, the bully exposed, the teachers complicit, the FBI mother who turned whispers into reckoning. Screens lit up with clips from the hallway, Naomi's words echoing across timelines. Hashtags swelled, hashtag silence is strength, hashtag justice for Aaliyah. By the next morning, the walls of Lincoln High carried a different kind of silence. Not the silence of complicity, but the silence that comes when people are forced to confront the truth. Emily kept her head down, her power stripped. Teachers chose their words more carefully. Students thought twice before joining in cruelty. And Aaliyah? She walked the hallways as she always had, quiet, steady, unshaken. But now her silence no longer felt like a shield. It felt like victory. Justice had not erased the pain, but it had made the truth undeniable. And in a world quick to twist narratives, that was no small victory. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, justice is the sound of silence finally being heard. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe silence should never be mistaken for weakness, then share it. Start the conversation. Because change begins when whispers become voices. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us in the comment section below. Tell us what you think, because your voice matters, and together, silence can be transformed into something louder than cruelty ever was.